So last time we were just wrapping up on varroa mites. You guys have any more questions on varroa mites off the top of your head? We can also touch base after class again. This will be a shortened session, so. Yes?
So like for treating for mites, do you want to get to the stuff that's more, the bees walk through it? Is that what's happening? Is it the gel and the bees are walking through it?
It depends on the chemical. There's different treatments really. A lot of them are by contact, that the bees do walk over an absorbent pad or like a little petri dish with this gel in it, or a gel-like substance that has been squeezed onto the top bars and stuff. A lot of the chemicals are through touch contact, but there are ones that work basically off of evaporation. I don't know if that's the right word. It's because on hot days this goes ahead and dissipates and fills your hive with the chemical faster than on cold days and stuff. So it's not, I don't know, it's like it dissolves into a gas that then goes through the hive and kills the mites and stuff. So not all of it is just through contact.
Does the temperature kind of weigh in some of the success of the treatment?
Some treatments, yes. You really need to read the individual treatment's directions, and it should tell you on it, only use this much if your daytime temps are this, or use that much if your daytime temps are this, or do not use if your daytime temps do not fit within this parameter and stuff. It will give you warnings on each one. And so fun. But anyhow, just read the label and follow it. Yes?
They only kill the mites that are on the adult bees, right?
Not necessarily. When you're talking about oxalic acid vaporization, yes, that only does the mites on the adult bees. However, when you're doing these chemicals that are through touch contact, that can transcend into like the larval stage of the bee. When it's uncapped, those chemicals can get in there and still treat for mites there. Most of the chemicals don't just absorb right through the capping. So that's a lot of times why you have a 7 or 14 or a 21 day cycle to your mite treatment, is so that basically a huge portion of your bees are hatching out, and that there's foot traffic coming in and out of that cell carrying the chemical residuals to kill any mites that might have been hiding in there. Yes?
Would you say that mites are your biggest threat? I mean, I know we have a lot of other diseases, but is this the most prevalent for killing?
I would say mites are the biggest problem for bees because they're the ones that all the diseases piggyback on to get into the hives. Even if you clean your hives up from a disease, you just have to get one mite in there and it then starts feeding on a bee. It has children. All of its children have the same diseases from the mother, and they feed on bees and they just reintroduce all the diseases in there. You know, Israeli bee paralysis virus, deformed wing virus, black queen cell virus, both European and American foul brood can be on the mites, you know, that are coming into the hive. There's just a slew of nasty things. Why am I not? Nostema. The mites will carry about every pathogen that is out there into your colonies. So that's why I'd say yes, it is the biggest problem for beekeepers. The second biggest problem would probably be pesticides. All right. Hop into the first slide for tonight. So, on to this chapter here for diseases, parasites, problems that you need to be aware of. Something that you should possibly incorporate into your regimen of beekeeping is culling comb. When comb basically is in your hive year after year after year, it's picking up residuals of pesticides and other things there. You'll notice that your comb will get darker and darker and almost get like thicker walls to the cells and stuff there. And over time, a lot of beekeepers will take old black frames of comb and they basically dispose of them. In this day and age, if you're running plastic frames, you can take a putty knife and just scrape off all of the old comb on your frames. And usually there's enough little bit of residual wax, you can just throw it back into a beehive and they'll build comb back out onto it. If you're worried about them building out after you've scraped it off, or let's say you scraped off the problems with like wax moth larvae where they do all this, we'll get onto that later, but you may lose most of the wax off your frame. You can take like a little crock pot and put a dish in there with some wax, and just with a paintbrush, go ahead and just quick take some of that hot wax and brush it back on the frames before you throw it in your hive. And that'd just be if you feel like when you were scraping all that wax off that you took too much and that there wasn't really anything but the plastic there for the bees. But anyhow, they suggest cycling your comb. This is saying every 3 to 5 years. I've heard 7 years is when you should basically cycle your comb out. Essentially, if it just gets black and nasty looking, just cycle it out and get some fresh stuff in there. Most of the chemicals that now is in agriculture with neonicotinoids are good about only having 2 to 3 years of lifespan on them. That was one of the problems in their early releases of neonicotinoids, was that they lasted 7 years before they even started breaking down. And it was a compound that was kind of friendly with wax and liked to absorb into it. So even though year number 1 you would get so much of this chemical soak into your wax, well, that would take 7 years before it actually start breaking down. So you'd get year number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 building up in there until you got pretty deadly loads in your wax and stuff of that. So hopefully with the farming industry turning to chemicals that are 2 and 3, it won't be as big of a concern for you going forward in your beekeeping careers here and stuff. But that was something to note. But culling your comb also will help with various diseases, because some of the diseases are basically have fungal spores, and they can go into a dormant state, and under most circumstances the bees will maintain it and keep the stuff from rearing its head. But if your hive for any reason gets sick, let's say mite loads start getting up, well, they also aren't being as careful with house cleaning of the hive, and those spores can go ahead and take hold and cause you other problems. So culling your comb helps get some of those problems out of your hive as well. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, question?
Is there a time of the year that's best to do it, or does it not really matter?
Early spring of the year when your hive is still small. I mean, like real early, like here in March, if you're doing an inspection and all the bees are in one box and they're not in the bottom box, you could at that time look through the bottom box. That slide was saying, just take 3 or 4 frames out a year, and then every year take that same amount out of every single box. I'm more of the person that leans towards, instead of taking it out of every single box I've got, well, this is just my old box and I'll take the whole box away, put all brand new comb in that box and give it back to the bees. Well, early spring there, if they're only in your top box, it's real easy to access all those frames. Those would be your brand new ones, and usually you swap boxes around anyhow so that the bees can always move up in the hive. So then for the next year, your old comb would already be in the bottom again, where the bees wouldn't be for springtime. You
answered my question, because I was afraid that if you put the new ones in the bottom and bees don't build down, then they're not going to go back to that. But
if you were to get rid of the nasty comb down there, let's say 7-year-old comb that you don't like, you put all fresh frames in that box. I just put that on the top of your hive, and your bees are clustered and they're probably right near that anyhow, having moved up through the honey super. So they'd be looking at those brand new frames wanting to move up on them, or at least the newly coated frames. All right, so just to recap, this is what healthy brood looks like here. You know, have a beautiful coloration on here. nice cappings. It looks like we're a little out of focus maybe.
That's
but-
the picture.
All right, but you have nice crisp ivory larvae in there. Go on the next one. There should be another slide here. Again, this is brand new comb here, so of course it's clean and nice, but healthy larvae with royal jelly there. You don't see any. We're going to get to nasty frames here in a little bit, so this is why we're recapping what beautiful stuff looks like. Next one. Again, this is a little bit older comb, but still really nice because it hasn't turned black or anything. You got a beautiful egg here in the cells. And again, look at the color of those larvae and the nice jelly that's around them and stuff there. All right. So we are first covering American foulbrood. This is the nastier version because there's also European foulbrood that'll follow this up. This is the one you can't fix. American foulbrood, if you ever get it in your hives, there's really two recourses. You either have to burn all your equipment and start over fresh as a beekeeper because the spores that American foulbrood puts into your hive never break down, never go away. I shouldn't say never, but they're going to last for decades in there, and they could just go ahead and propagate themselves sometime down the road. And what American foulbrood does, it basically takes young larvae, gets in their bodies, self-replicates in them. It's a microsporidia, and it's multiplying in there, and it basically kills the larva. It makes it turn brown. It turns it into like a liquid jelly sack, and it also makes your hive stink to high heaven. So it's highly contagious. When any of these larvae that have been replicating the microsporidia in them, when they break open, when the adult bees are trying to pull them out of the cells and just the liquid breaks out of them, it gets on the adult bees and it just spreads the spores all over the surfaces in the hive there and stuff. You can get rid of the symptoms with antibiotics, but you really, if the state apiarist ever tells you this colony has American foulbrood, you should give up on it and just burn it, because even if you control the symptoms in this colony here, at low infestations, the adult bees can pick it up, fly to flowers, brush up against another bee on a flower, and then spread the spores onto that bee that goes to a different colony. Maybe it's a different colony in your own apiary, maybe it's your neighbor down the road, but all it takes is one spore getting into another colony and infecting a larva, and it starts the process over in there, and it just grows throughout it. Just like a cold virus getting spread around and stuff. That's what happens here. I was saying you can treat the symptoms of it with antibiotics. You can, if your hive has American foulbrood, you can apply antibiotics to it and you fight back the symptoms of the disease, but it's always there underlying. And you can stop treatment and maybe 4 months, 6 months go by and your hive still looks good. But suddenly month 7 kicks around and you just find frame after frame that we'll show here in a little bit that's just nasty, rotting, dying off bees and stuff, and you got to start the process all over. So since you can't just clean it out 100%, they always say burn hives. The second way of getting rid of this, besides burning it, is through radiation. You can take it to a laboratory and they can go ahead and irradiate your equipment, but you could buy probably 10 or 20 hives brand new off of the cost of treating one hive with radiation. So you might as well just burn it, because it doesn't make sense to spend the obnoxious amounts of money trying to irradiate your hive. You had a question?
I'm sorry. So when you're burning the hive, do you take all the bees and everything because they're still living there and just...
A lot of times there's what is the chemical that they use? It's also like in spy movies, the stuff that people like bite down on a pill or whatever, and it just makes a froth at the mouth and kill them real quick.
Cyanide?
Cyanide, thank you. There's a cyanide treatment that basically that's a little dose you put in there, you light on fire, and the fumes go up through the hive, and in like 2 seconds it's killed every bee in the hive. A lot of times they'll do like a little cyanide treatment. I do know some beekeepers that'll just go ahead and stick cloth in the hive, wrap a rope around it, and throw it on a burn pile and let it burn up that way and stuff, because even if the hive started to open up, the heat of the fire just melts any bees' wings from them trying to fly off and stuff there. But some people will try to pour soapy water down in their hive because soapy water will block the spiracles, the breathing vents down the bees' sides, and it basically makes the bees suffocate. They think it's a more humane way, but they don't realize they're making every bee basically suffocate with that soapy water. But
The point is, though, that the bees are infected at that point.
yeah, the bees have sporidia on their body, and if you don't kill them along with burning all the equipment, the bees have no hive. They're just going to join up with another hive that they can find.
Do you need to get rid of your tools that you were using on that hive as well, or just?
I do know some beekeepers that are religious enough they get rid of like their bee suit if it had any sort of stains on it from propolis or anything else. They'll just go ahead and get rid of their hive tool and this and that. Other beekeepers will go ahead and just stick their hive tool in a fire, and they'll take like bleach and they'll just try to really clean up their clothing and other stuff. That means, I don't know if bleach actually kills the microsporidia, but I have heard of beekeepers doing that. I don't know what the rule of thumb is from the state apiarist on whether you should just eradicate all your accessory equipment too, or if a thorough cleaning with chemicals is sufficient. So
And you can't harvest the honey that might have been in there.
it had the spores in there. I mean, it's fine for your human consumption, but
But then it's
you're then
inside
putting
the
that stuff
machine.
inside your extractor, and you're then, spilling that on the floor of your garage or wherever else, and bees are coming in there to eat up the spoils that are there and stuff. So it's a nasty thing that the beekeeping industry is very religious on just eradicating, because it destroys your livelihood. Go ahead.
Say it's highly contagious, exactly how common is it?
It's not common at all, because I don't know anywhere in the United States that somebody would purposefully try to keep hives and just try to treat them with chemical. They just get rid of them because it keeps coming back, and it spreads out to anybody's bees that are anywhere near you.
But we've got hives that are, feral hives, that are living in a tree out in the woods someplace
That hive would die off on
but
its own.
they can spread it before it dies
They,
off.
they sure could. They sure could. But then that case would pop up in somebody's apiary, and that apiary would be destroyed. And that case would pop up in some backyard beekeeper's place, and those hives would get destroyed. And since hives in the wild really, especially infested with American foul brood, really aren't going to last very long, well, they also die out as well. And it kind of, through all these extreme measures, it gets curtailed.
I mean, somebody like you with a whole bee yard with lots of hives in it, if you get one with foul brood in it, is it going to be in all of them, or can you get just one hive out of many and it have to be burned?
I could take my chances there and see if over the next month or two, I burn the ones that I felt had any risk there, and I could take the chance with remaining pallets that show no sign to see if it had ever spread to them. Now, 9 times out of 10, maybe not 9 times out of 10, maybe 3/4 of the time, whatever, the odds are pretty high that the spores did get spread around, because bees drift. They go out and forage, and in one of our early classes, you saw that some of the hives were really tall and some were short, and we said you could move hives around, or we said just naturally the hives on the ends of your rows typically tend to grow really fast because the bees returning don't always go down to the third hive that they came from that day. They might go to hive number 2 or the first hive that they came to and accidentally go in the door there and just join up with that hive. Well, if it had spores on it, it just now infected that other hive. So it's easy to contaminate other hives in your own apiary. You're better off if you had 1 or 2 hives diagnosed with it, just wipe out this whole site. All right, so this is what American foul brood looks like. I think there's another slide. We can come back to this one, just show some of the ugliness. Is there one more, or is that going on to? Yep. All right, go back to the first one here. So, instead of having nice bubbles for the tops of your cells, these guys will a lot of times be sunken in, or it'll just be wavy and stuff. But essentially the larva inside has died and shriveled up, and the capping sinks back down with them. It also discolors the capping because basically the larva is rotting in there and the spiridia is spreading throughout the cell itself there. You'll see a lot of times here holes that are just punctured in different cells. There's another one down over there. As these are dying and rotting, the nurse bees are starting to uncap them and try to drag the nastiness out of the hive. The same thing as if you took one of those drone frames, the green frames I talked about for freezing to get rid of mites. Well, if you put that in a hive and they know those bees are all dead in there, they'll uncap those, drag the drones out. They're doing the same thing with the larva. They're sensing that the larva is dead and rotting, so they're pulling them out of the cells and trying to clean the cells up and stuff.
Getting contaminated.
Yes, they'll get contaminated. In the adult form, it doesn't kill the bee. It just leaves spores on the outside of their body and stuff. It's the larval stage that it just rips right through them and uses them as a reproduction factory for more of their spores. Go on to the next slide. So, as a beginning beekeeper, if you ever see some nastiness in your hive, chances are it's really European foul brood, but you're not going to necessarily know just glancing at the frame. There's a kind of a little cheat to telling whether you have European foul brood or American foul brood, and it's to take like a stem of grass or a little stick off of a tree or a piece of hay or something that you can poke down into one of those cells that is sunken in and discolored, and you swirl it around in there. Basically, you liquefy the contents of the cell there, and you go to pull it out. And if it's sort of like on Ghostbusters where one of the people got slimed and the stuff just is like stretching and like mucus and wants to come out from the frame and be stuck to that straw a little bit before it breaks, you have American foul brood. If you have European foul brood, it'll just be like you were stirring up some yogurt in a cup and it'll never do a strand at all following it out. That is the unofficial, non-laboratory way of testing. There are some others where you can put it in like milk and it's American foul brood will curdle it and European doesn't, or is it flip-flop?
I don't know.
I'd have to double check on that. And then of course there's laboratory tests where you can call Andy Joseph out there and he can send it off to a lab, but he'll probably look at a frame and he'll see where it's leaving some, it's called scale. Basically when that larva degenerated and stuff in there, all the liquid spilled out, and then the outer piece of the bee basically shrivels up to this little scale that then sticks to the inside of the cell, and the bees really can't remove it worth a darn. They try and try, but it's kind of like leather now stuck to the insides of the cell there. But if he sees scale on any of your frames, and that's the number one way he tells when he's looking at used beekeeping equipment that's being sold at auction, he'll look through it really carefully and look for any scale in there that there might have been American foul brood there as the cause of the equipment being sold. So here's another picture of that ropey test. You can see the strand of liquid that's basically, as they're pulling the straw away from there, that just is still stuck to it. If it's a European foul brood, it won't do anything of that. It'll just be this, like I said, it's like yogurt in the cell there, and it doesn't matter. You can stab yogurt a ton of times with a toothpick. It's never going to do a kind of a snotty little strand following it out. Keep going. Here's the scale here. So you can kind of see here where the old larva has dried up and is now stuck to the cell. Different ones here, you can just see the scales that are dried up there and left behind. You won't see that with European foul brood. No, it's fine. This is not proof positive that you have any of the foul broods seeing a shotgun brood pattern, but if you see shotgun brood pattern, just know something bad is happening in your hive. It could be foul brood, you could have a failing queen, you could have a queen that was inbred with her brothers too much now and is genetically laying drones that have an exact genetic match to the queen, and they really are diploid drones. Well, that's science above you and stuff, don't worry about it. But needless to say, shotgun brood pattern tells you as a beekeeper something is bad in your hive, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's foul brood. It just is one of the signs of foul brood. All right, covered that. Early detection is, best prevention maybe for other hives in your apiary.
Mhm.
There is no prevention once you find it, so I'm not sure why it says early detection, but anyhow. And yes, that is the antibiotics that I was talking about there for trying to treat it, but you really shouldn't. You should just burn it. This is the same chemicals they use for European foul brood that you can clean up. So, go ahead. All right, European foul brood. So, everything I just told you about American foul brood is basically the same truth for European foul brood at first glance, except you can treat it with a antibiotic and clean it up out of your hive, and it doesn't leave scale behind, and it doesn't do the snotty residue when you're doing the stick stirring. It's still going to give you sunken in, discolored cappings. It's still going to give you nasty, stinky frames of rotting bees. It's going to do all the same bad things as the other, but this one's treatable. So, yep, you can go ahead and flip to the next cell here. With it, you can kind of see that larva has died even before the capping stages here, and is already starting to break down and stuff. It's just more of the stuff to tell you, hey, something's going on in your hive that's bad, instead of having beautiful white larvae like we saw in those original photos that I was showing of good frames. More yucky European foul brood. All right. For European foul brood, those antibiotics for cleaning it up, sometimes it will help you if you do like a brood break. So literally requeening your hive, making it queenless for a while and putting a new queen in there. Because the European foul brood is reproducing in the larva, if you get rid of the queen for a while, she's not laying eggs for a while, and the bees are cleaning the frames up themselves and everything, getting the new queen in there with that brood break, no eggs, no larva for a little bit, that can also clean up your hive quite well and stuff. Another thing is simply give your bees, keep your bees as healthy as possible, and they can clean up a lot of this on their own with the European foul brood. So give them a pollen patty if you see that they're suffering from this, because they'll have a lot of complex amino acids and nutrition in it that's all across the board in the pollen patty, as opposed to maybe there's only one or two types of plants in bloom that doesn't have a really rich complex of protein coming in the door. Go ahead and give them a division board feeder with some syrup and a feed stimulant. It's like having a cold and having chicken noodle soup, and going ahead and taking one of those emergency pills that has the heavy doses of vitamin C and stuff like that in it. You're basically trying to help the bees get over a cold here with the European foul brood. All right, new subject here for us to talk about. Small hive beetles, and this is so you can see it. They will look, I'm trying to think of comparable size. Everybody's been on a picnic and seen garbage bugs, right? The little black beetle that has a couple of spots on its back and stuff. These guys are about the same size as a garbage bug. Trying to think anything else that we can compare to in size if you haven't seen one of those. If you were to take a sharpened pencil and just break the lead off there down to the wood, I'm not saying poke a dot on a piece of paper, but the actual chunk of lead there that's sticking out, that's about how big a small hive beetle is. These guys, they're attracted to your hives for the pollen that's in there. They can smell the plant pollen, and they're going in there to try to lay their eggs on the frames that have high concentrations of the pollen. Even a pollen patty that might only have 2% real pollen in it there, it's got all the essential oils and stuff to make the bees think it's tasty and stuff there. This will also attract hive beetles into your hive, having the pollen patties in there. For the most part, these are guys, you're only going to see nasty levels of these if your hive is starting to get sick with other stuff. These guys are vultures, the same thing as wax moths. They only bring down your hive if your hives are already sick from something else. So these guys come in there, they just start running around the hive. The bees will chase them into the corners of the hive, a lot of times chase them out of the hive, but when they're sick, they stop defending the hive very well, and the hive beetles go around to the pollen, they lay eggs. The eggs hatch on the pollen cells, and they hatch as little worms that burrow down into the pollen and start eating through the wax walls. And as they're eating the pollen, they also leave like a poop trail behind them that if they get into any of the honey cells, that poop trail automatically ferments the honey and makes it start stinking in the hive. A lot of times it'll start bleeding out of the frames and stuff. They do a nasty job here. If you want to keep coming out.
It's ugly. You ready?
Yep.
This is nasty.
So, those beetles, they lay tons and tons of little eggs, and when the colony isn't actively eating those eggs off of the wax frames, you might have 100 of them hatch out today, and tomorrow 150 of those eggs hatch out, and they grow really, really fast. The same as the bee larva, in the course of like 5-6 days, it turns into something very visible that is filling the cell. Well, these guys grow at an enormous rate also, and it'll look like your hive is just swarming with a ton of maggots. I get called all the time going, what's going on in my hive? I have maggots. Did a mouse die in there or something? I'm like, no, you either have wax moths or hive beetles. Do you have any spider webbing in your hive? And if they say no, I'm like, okay, well, you have hive beetle larvae in there that's sliming up your hive and stuff. But yeah, that's basically a ton of fishing bait right there. No, you can go ice fishing with it the same as you can waxworms.
Waxworms.
That you buy at Walmart to go ice fishing is wax moth larvae that somebody is actually growing on purpose for fishing purposes. But this is a whole bunch of honey and hive beetle poop that's all over that's just sliming up. The nice thing is if your hive gets infested with hive beetles and dies out, you can actually take one of the boxes that's all slimy and nasty, and you can put it on one of your hives that's overflowing with bees and is in a beautiful state. Those bees come up there, they clean all of the nastiness out of there, they fix the comb, they patch it up, and they start using it again. With wax moths, all that nasty cocooning spider webbing that you're going to see up here, they can't really chew it out and fix it worth a darn, and it's a lot more problematic to clean up. I think there's more slides of this. Yep.
Yeah.
So down here you can, and I don't think you can see it from out there, but there's literally trails where the worms have been walking through the soupiness down on the bottom. When they get to a certain size, they actually crawl out the front of your hive, and it just looks like tons of maggots crawling out the front of your hive, and they're falling down on the ground, and they'll burrow into the ground to then pupate into the adults. One nice thing about being here in Iowa, if you are not near a commercial beekeeper that took his hives out to California and brought them back, if you're out in no man's land, it could be all summer before you see a couple of hive beetles there towards fall time ever show up in your hives. Just because here in Iowa, our ground freezes 4 feet deep with frost. Well, these guys only ever go down, what is it, like 18 inches into the soil?
Yeah.
They only go down so deep into the soil when they basically are going to pupate into the adulthood and then come back out of the soil. Well, our winters kill 100% of them here in Iowa, and it's only because the commercial guys bring back hives with a few beetles here and there that we see them, so anybody sees them early in the spring.
I've actually seen an adult hive beetle in a hive array this spring. One it somehow survived the winter in a hive. I'm like, yeah.
Age-wise, it shouldn't have.
I agree with you. It shocked me to see it, and it's dead now. but I surprised as could be. It's first week of March, and I look in there and there's a hive beetle on a frame.
Well, just traditionally,
Yeah.
they have hive beetles have a tough go of it in Iowa because our winters clean them up so well.
Yep.
More and more and more. Okay, so ways of helping with, we're still on hive beetles. Nope, we're on wax moths now. Okay, finally. Wax moths and hive beetles look very much the same, and
I can't tell.
oh, it's just saying similar controls.
Yeah.
No, this still is the sliminess from the hive beetle. But this should probably have come in sequence
Mhm.
after wax moths since it's referencing wax moths.
That's
But
all right.
anyhow,
We'll fix it.
after honey extraction time, if you don't want the beetles to ravage your equipment, usually you'll move it into a area and the boxes here are stacked all up nice and straight. If you crisscross them so there's a lot of ventilation, it'll cut down on the beetles wanting to do anything in there. They shouldn't really want to go after your honey supers much at all because there isn't pollen in there. Pollen is what really is driving their reproduction system there. So, and you have empty frames, they don't get nutrition off of eating wax. So exposure to light and ventilation. Paramoth, still I think somebody here is getting some strings crossed because I'm sure hive beetles don't like paramoth, but it's not really a prescribed treatment for paramoth. Freezing definitely is. If you have the ability to stick your equipment in like a chest freezer for 24 to 48 hours, you'll have made sure to kill off any residual eggs or hive beetles that were still on your equipment before you store it in your garage for the wintertime.
How about the traps? Beetle traps?
Beetle traps at the point that you're storing equipment.
No, I mean in your hive.
Yeah.
You see some.
There's several different ways for trying to take care of beetles. One is a home remedy. Those Swiffer dusting pads, if you put those in the hives, like just under your inner cover or one of the recesses of your hives, because hive beetles are always trying to get away from the bees, so they're always trying to get in that thin little space on top of the frame between that frame and the next one where the bees maybe can't get to, or your inner cover where the bees have a hard time walking between the inner cover and the frame there and stuff. The beetles go where the bees can't really get to very well, and that's where they're hanging out. So if you put a Swiffer pad in there, Swiffer pads, the beetles will go up there to hide from the bees, but their legs get caught in the little hairs of the Swiffer pad, and they basically starve to death in there. They just get hung up in there, they can't get to food, they can't go anywhere, and they'll starve to death in it. I've seen people put Swiffer pads on their hive, and they'll peel them off, and it's got 50 dead hive beetles in it that are just permanently stuck in it. So that's a home remedy. Another home remedy is political signs, that corrugated plastic for political signs. You can take Crisco, and you plug up the holes on one side. You'll just cut like a little square, like this, of political sign, and you'll drive Crisco into the ends on the one side, flip it over, and it's called boric acid. It's used as roach poison, but you just dribble that in the holes to fill up a good chunk of the space there with this boric acid, and then you'll put some more Crisco over the other end, and it basically is now trapping the boric acid in there. You'll set that either on your top bars of your hive or you'll put it on your bottom board. And the beetles are drawn to that fatty Crisco, and they want to eat on the Crisco, and they also want to hide from the bees, so they just walk on inside the cells. And for some reason, the beetles are dumb enough that they eat some of the boric acid too, and it dissolves them from the inside out. Honeybees aren't going to eat the boric acid at all. It's going to be inside of there, and they don't eat the hive beetle themselves or anything else, so it's perfect. It's been said to be perfectly fine among every beekeeper I've ever talked to and stuff there. Let's see here. Obviously, keeping strong colonies is another way. Your traps, they're mediocre for effectiveness. They have ones that you put in the hive on the sides of the hive that you fill with mineral spirits. And when the beetles are running away from the bees, they'll basically go down inside the trap and they drown in the mineral spirits. They can't climb back out. But the beetles have to be driven to that particular part of the hive. And usually if I see somebody has a bunch of beetles in their hive and having problems with it, they only ever see a few beetles in the trap. So it's doing minimal help. There's another one that's a specialized bottom board that you can have bottom board / entrance on your hive. That does help some with controlling beetles coming in and out of your hive. It's not so good on getting rid of the beetles that are already in your hive reproducing, but it's something that you can do there. Really the Swiffer pad does a great job. Just get the unscented ones if you're getting because you know, any of those home products and stuff for dusting, cleaning, this and that, most of them they love to imbue with some scent. So when you're dusting stuff, your room smells nice and fancy. Well, the bees don't want that perfume in their hive and stuff, so that'll really agitate them.
That's it for beetles.
All right. Tracheal mites. I talked about this a little bit when somebody was asking a question of why is it you don't hear about tracheal mites, and it's because basically tracheal mites, for the most part, stopped becoming a problem when varroa mites did become a problem. Some of the same chemicals used to kill varroa mites do kill tracheal mites, so that could be part of it. And another part of it is, since we stopped treating bees for this, basically the entire industry stopped treating bees for this, I think the bees developed natural resistance to them then. So, as the slide says here, don't really seem to be an issue anymore. The symptoms, reduced foraging. Basically, the tracheal mites get inside the bee's trachea, eat holes in it, and then feed on the bee's fluids some there. It brings down the bee's health and stuff, but it's the adult bee. It's only living 30 to 45 days anyhow, so at this rate, it's probably living 25 to 35 days on the shorter end of stuff, but it's still doing work and still going on there. Detection is really tricky for this. I have heard that bees with tracheal mites act very sluggish, but there's other diseases out there that also cause bees to be sluggish, so that's not a sure sign of it. About the only sure sign that you've got tracheal mites is your state apiarist taking a sampling of your bees, dissecting them and putting them under a microscope and seeing if you've got problems with them. But old information, prevention. If for some reason the state apiarist or a bee laboratory said, yeah, you've got high levels of tracheal mites, a simple solution is requeen your hive. Since a lot of bees seem to be impervious to tracheal mites anymore, simply trading up the genetics of your hive could be the simple solution there. You can also use, it's hard to even find them anymore in the chemical catalogs for beekeeping companies, but they had these little menthol packets that you could buy that you'd put in there, and the mentholatum basically killed off the tracheal mites in the bees' trachea. Sorry, these words repeat themselves here. And Apigard is actually a mite treatment, a varroa mite treatment, so.
Ready on the moths.
All right, wax moths. So here's your honeybee, and that's a greater wax moth there. There is a lesser version of it that, size-wise, between the shadows of my fingers, probably the lesser version there. It'll be smaller than the honeybee and stuff there. But it'll basically be the same color of gray. Shoot. It's not even, I wish they had a better color slot, where it was not a gray moth on a gray background and stuff like that, but it's just a powdery gray moth and stuff there. It's about the only one that's going to be interested in getting in your hives. There's going to be big fat moths that land on your hive. It's not a wax moth. So their children look like worms also, but this is cobwebbing up here. And when they decide to turn into adult wax moths, there's one of the adults right up there. But when these guys decide to turn into adults, they actually form this sort of like silkworm cocoon around themselves. Now, the whole time that they move through the frames, eating the pollen and the honey and the brood, they're leaving a trail of this silk behind them, this silk cobwebbing and stuff. But when they decide to actually turn into adults, they'll form a cocoon around them, and the process of them turning into adults, it'll actually, if they form this cocoon on the wood of your hive, it'll actually leave 8-out indentations from their cocoons. On the plastic, it really doesn't do that. This is in between your frames and stuff here. This is if you just lifted a hive body up. You can see how they're just all cocooning together and stuff. And these little black pellets that you're seeing here is actually their poop all over in your hive. Is there another slide for them?
Yeah.
This is where it starts getting nasty. So, as these guys are digging through your frames and leaving all this silk behind, it's basically like a whole bunch of really dense spider webbing. And this stuff the bees can't really chew and pull out of the hive. A lot of times, if you just had one frame in your hive that had a lot of wax moth damage and all the other frames were beautiful in there, let's say you tried combining frames from another hive or something after you cleaned it up, killed the wax moths. A lot of times, instead of them trying to actually remove that, they'll just put a whole bunch of propolis over it and just try to basically cocoon it up themselves with wax and plant resins rather than them trying to rip it out. You yourself will have to come out here with a putty knife and clean all that stuff out. It is a pain in the butt. It's actually probably easier for a person just to take a pressure washer and spray the frames off, removing all the wax and all of the comb and stuff there, and just come back with a paint roller later or a paintbrush with hot wax on it and recoat the frames and put it into a new hive.
Chickens are great for that too.
Yeah, chickens will eat it all off the frames. All right, wax moths are just like hive beetles. They're only going to bother hives that are already deteriorating from something else. Again, they're vultures coming in and being opportunistic feeders on the hive. So how do you keep wax moths out of your hive? Keep strong, healthy colonies. When you do have equipment that you've extracted honey from, or just spare equipment that already has drawn comb on it from a previous season, you have to do one of several things. Either A, keep it in a space with ample ventilation and have it crisscross, because all the extra ventilation and stuff is just not conducive for them. And just wax all on its own, the wax moth doesn't really get nutrition from that either. It either needs the honey or the pollen, or it needs brood to feed off of. It'll actually go after all three of it when it's eating stuff out of the hive. But wax itself, if you just had, let's say you took a bucket of wax cappings and you froze it so that you killed all the stuff that was already in there, and you had already washed the cappings up, and it's just pure wax cappings there, and you set it outside, wax moths aren't going to come after that and lay a whole bunch of eggs in it and be able to reproduce in that. You need to have honey in there, or you need to have pollen in there, or you need to have brood in there for them to go ahead and be doing stuff. So crisscrossing your boxes will deter moths from really using that stuff. I prefer actually packing all my boxes like number 2 here, packing all my boxes really tightly together, and you'll usually wrap it with plastic and stuff there, but you leave the top open, and you'll take like a little piece of cardboard, and you'll just put a scoop on each. Let's say you had 4 stacks. You'll put a scoop on this one, scoop, 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 and these paramoth crystals, they will evaporate, and it's heavier than air, so the fumes all go down into the box, and it'll fill that space up with this paramoth fume, and it'll keep any eggs that are in there, or young wax moths or adult wax moths that are going down to these fumes, it just kills them off. In the springtime, you go ahead and you'll remove that saran wrap, pull the boxes apart, let them sit there for a few days and air out before you put it on any hives that you're trying to start fresh. You can throw it directly on a hive after pulling it off that stack from the paramoth. It's going to stink of paramoth, and that hive's going to be pissy for a few days because they don't like the smell of that paramoth either if you don't give it that ventilation time.
So when you're stacking them up and putting the saran wrap or whatever,
Yeah, it's just packing wrap, you know.
do you leave them crisscross, or they're
No,
just
no,
the
no.
same?
If you're going to use paramoth, you want the boxes together as tight as possible. You want it to be airtight so that when these fumes go down in there, they just pool up to the surface of the hive there. Even if you have it stacked all the way up here, that the fumes just replace all the oxygen in there, and that's the only thing now filling it up is this vaporous gas that kills the moths off.
And when you're stacking that, last question.
Yeah.
Do you have your frames inside also?
Yes, frames are still inside, everything's there. You want these fumes to basically protect all of your equipment. A lot of people do the paramoth there just because it's such a sure way of keeping moths out of your equipment. Number 3 there, if you have the ability to freeze your equipment, if you're going to store this in your garage and stuff like that, you can freeze your equipment and then crisscross it and leave it alone out there, and then it should be fine. No guarantees that you might have something in there that still attracts the moths and stuff. What's the best with freezing is actually if someday your hobby grows so big that you can build a big walk-in freezer, or get one of those semi-trailers that's a freezer unit and stuff, and you can just load all the tons of equipment in there and turn that freezer on until outside temp gets down to freezing temps, and then you can turn the unit off and just let your equipment stay frozen and fresh until next spring, where you can then pop right back onto hives. Then you're not putting any stinky fumes on the stuff, and you're keeping it as clean and pristine as the day you pulled it off the hives. I built a walk-in freezer for myself, and that's why I say that's really slick, because I love putting honey supers that are just as fresh as the day I pulled them off the hive right back onto hives for them to build back out on.
So you said you could hose the frames off a pressure washer to get rid of the.
Once you get all that cocoony silk stuff in there, you can take a pressure washer and it blows all the wax and all that cocoon and everything off of your frames. And then I said, take a paintbrush or a paint roller dipped in hot wax, and you can put a new coat on there and give it back to hives to start over.
Can you use the same thing with the boxes though, instead of the
Yeah, you could power wash the inside of the boxes too. Usually the boxes are a little easier for cleaning up because the plastic foundation already has all the comb dimples built into it. It's hard to get all that off of there quick and easy, where the power washer just takes it off real easy. For the boxes, your putty knife or your hive tool, you're just scraping along there and you can get it pretty darn clean. And
The paramoth will kill what's in there, but it doesn't have a prophylactic effect, right? It won't keep it from coming back.
no,
Yeah.
no. But the paramoth, if you've wrapped it with plastic, literally you can buy in any Walmart, if you go to the section where your shipping supplies are at, they should have those big tubes of plastic like this that normally you wrap pallets with. Well, just wrap your beehive equipment with it, and that usually gives you enough of a vapor barrier there that paramoth will be slowly dissipating and keeping those boxes full of fumes for like 3 months. So, this, I have no experience with this chemical, but supposedly it can be used while you have bees in the boxes there to try and keep wax moths out of your hives. But have you ever used this chemical or read up on it?
No, and if your hive is healthy, I wouldn't see a need for it. If you have bees in there and they're not doing
And if
it.
you already see signs of wax moth, you should probably treat the cause of the hive
Right.
diminishing to that point that the hive beetles and wax moths are taking over, than just trying to keep the invaders out.
Excuse me.
Chalkroot.
All right, chalkbrood. Chalkbrood is a fungus that also affects the larva of the hive. It basically reproduces itself inside of the larva, so that, how mushrooms grow all that white spore material underground and then it'll pop up with a nice mushroom cap, but there's all that white fuzzy spore stuff underground. Well, the white spore stuff is basically taking over the larval's body in the hive. And if you ever come up to your beehive and there's all these tiny little white pills out in front of your hive that kind of look like tiny pieces of chalk that you could pick up and be writing on stuff. That means you have chalk brood in your hive there. It's typically caused because you put your hives in a very damp location. This is a naturally occurring fungus that's out there, and if your hive just is subjected to way too much moisture, this can pop up in your hive. Genetics will play some part here in it, because some hives, you can have 10 hives in the same location, and 2 of them have chronic chalk brood and the others don't. So that just meant that the queens and the bees in the hives were more susceptible to chalk brood, wasn't cleaning it up as fast as the other 8 hives in your apiary. A simple solution here is just move the bees out of that area to a sunnier, drier place. Typically, if you have this going on, you probably put your bees right next to a creek with a whole bunch of trees that are providing shade there and stuff. The wrong environment from the different classes that I was talking about. You always want your bees in a nice sunny area that they're going to stay extra warm. Sunny area helps drive away hive beetles and wax moths. They don't like the extra increased temperature in the hive and stuff. So you're giving a lot of bad factors by putting your bees in a very shaded, moist, damp area. So more pictures here of the chocolate. I don't think there's a picture of just the little pellets out, is there?
No, you go to facts after this.
A lot of times, even if you see those pellets out in front of your hive, don't get too concerned. If you look through there and look at your frames of brood, typically it's 1 here, 2 there, 1 there. It's never getting to a chronic stage that's actually going to kill your hive off. Typically, you just keep seeing these pellets come out there, and like I said, just move it to a sunny, warm spot, or at least a dry place, further away from like this creek that was giving it all the moisture. So management options, you can requeen and maybe you get a more resistant stock in there.
So when is it too late to requeen? You also said on the wax moth that you can requeen and change the genetics. When is it too late and you just have to say, y'all gotta go?
I don't think I said requeen with the wax moth. Wasn't that with European fall brood?
Yeah.
I was saying that you could do the brood break and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, as long as you have worker bees in the hive and you have a halfway decent population there, you can always requeen. If you're getting to the point there where you have hardly any bees that are adults in there that could take care of the queen, and the ones that you do see are moving sluggish or seem to be moving around erratically, like they've got something wrong in their head or something like that, you might just give up on that colony at that point, thinking, all right, those guys really aren't going to take care of a queen, let alone raise some larvae that can replace them and stuff. So it's kind of a judgment call on your part.
Cool. Nostema.
Nosema. The best way to describe Nosema is it's diarrhea in bees. It's caused by a sporidia in their intestinal tract, right?
I think so.
Yeah. I just don't want to say the wrong word here and stuff. But anyhow, if you want to pop forward, this that was under a microscope, seeing the little spores that live in their intestines. But Nosema, the bees will be trying to get out of the hive, and as they're leaving the hive, they just can't hold back anymore, and they're pooping right down the front side of your hive. I think there's a couple more pictures coming up here. So, yeah, go back to the first one. That's not so bad. You can always get a little bit of poop on the front of your hive. Probably means you have slight levels of Nosema in your hive. It's actually found in every single bee out there and stuff. So the bees always live with a little bit of this. Think about your own digestive system. You have all sorts of stuff in your digestive system for bacteria that will break down plants and give you a little nutrition off of it. And you can eat something that upsets your digestive tract and causes some discord with yourself. That's the same thing that Nosema is. It's something that's always present in the bees, but because of either the bees' health being brought down or them being really susceptible genetically to you know, every so often you'll have a queen born that all her kids are going to be very sensitive, sort of like,
Yeah.
I don't know, people with irritable bowel syndrome
Food
and stuff
allergies.
like that, you know? You could have a whole colony of bees with irritable bowel syndrome, so they're really sensitive to this. So genetically, you could just have some of that there, but all bees have a little bit of it, so don't worry if you have a little bit of speckling in the springtime or in the fall. Go back to that is where you should worry. When they're just crapping up the whole front of the hive there. Is there some more photos?
There's one more in frame, yeah.
Okay, here's even inside the hive. Bees don't go to the bathroom inside the hive. If they're going to the bathroom inside your hive, they have horrible levels of Nostema. There's simple treatments you can buy through the bee supplier catalogs that you just mix it in with their sugar water syrup and they'll drink it down, and it's just like you going and taking some ammonium AD and fixing some of your problems and stuff. So.
I had Andy Joseph out to my place to inspect a few years ago. I saw just a little bit of that, and he indicated to me that the mountain camp that I was using, that dry sugar, can sometimes give a little of the same indication. It's not necessarily Nostema, but it can upset the bees in their attempt to digest it.
Yeah.
So I thought I had a problem. He said, no, you've got sugar. It's going to happen sometimes.
Unless you're seeing those last two slides of the massive amounts of poop, just don't worry about it. The bees always have a little bit of stuff in their gut that can rear up in this bee and that bee and stuff. It's nothing horrible if you see a little bit of that. Covered.
Most of this. There's one more slide for this.
All right. Management, well-selected wintering sites. All right, good wintering preparation, strong hive. I just say, as long as you don't see anything bad, when you do see some of that bad stuff up there, this is one of the most common things you can just feed to the bees. The fumigellin, you can buy it through Man Lake, Daydant, anything. It isn't the end of the world financially to buy, and it cleans the Nosema symptoms up right away.
I think some of the Honeybee Healthy, those kind of things are.
It's supposed to be beneficial. That Honeybee Healthy is basically soothing the bee's digestive system. It's not like
It's the Pepto-Bismol.
it's not a medical treatment for it, but it's Pepto, yeah.
All right, CCD.
All right. Colony collapse disorder. Essentially, what happens is you have a full-size hive of big, beautiful bees, and you think everything's going great. You check it on a Monday, and everything is just wonderful. And you come back Thursday or Friday, and suddenly it's like 95% of your hive is gone. And you just have a few young nurse bees walking around trying to take care of the queen, and those nurse bees seem like they're a little ditzy or whatever, they're not moving around right and stuff, and all the other bees in your hive are gone, and you're just like, what's happening? And they're not dead inside the hive, they're not dead in front of the hive, they're just gone. What studies have basically shown is that at some point you get to a tipping level in your hive, and all the bees being born from that point forward, their navigation system isn't working, because bees normally have two ways of navigating. They leave the hive, and if they don't know the lay of the land at all, they'll do ever widening circles mapping the area, and they just circle out and they memorize the lay of the land there. Or they know the lay of the land and they've been given instructions from another bee on where a great flower is at, and they'll go out of the hive and they'll follow the directions right there and stuff. And then when they're done on the flower, they know how to trace their exact steps back to the hive. Well, the bees leave the hive when this tipping point happens, and they don't know how to track back. That part of their brain is actually shut down. I shouldn't even call it a brain, because a bee actually has nerve bundles all down its body. And each nerve bundle going down its body takes care of different functions. Well, the nerve bundle that is responsible for flight direction and sort of like pigeon homing beacon and stuff like that, this nerve bundle gets damaged to the point it can't trace the bee back to the hive. So that day, all these bees that have hit this tipping point leave the hive and don't find their way back. Well, hives as a superorganism, when all of a sudden a generation of bees vacate their jobs, younger bees will move up and try to take over that role, so there's always somebody in all types of jobs. So these younger bees that already were through the tipping stages for the older bees, because again, I'm calling it that they hit a tipping stage, and every bee born after that tipping stage is going to have this same defect in them. So these younger bees fly out and they can't make it home. The next wave flies out, and basically your hive empties itself out, and all you have are young bees that are far too juvenile to fly out of the hive. They're the soft, fuzzy ones that are freshly hatched and stuff like that. That's all you are left with in the colony, and they're damaged bees also. So when they get old enough, they're going to also vacate, and the queen's like, who's going to feed me? Who's going to take care of me? Because she doesn't do that on her own, and your hive dies over the course of like a week. And typically they call it, it got its name because beekeepers don't check their hive on a daily basis. They'd see that it's big and beautiful, and they'll come back to their hive a week or a month later, and all the bees are gone and the queen's laying dead in there, and it just suddenly collapsed. Even if they were checking their bees on a weekly basis, they saw it that week, and the next week their hive is basically dead with just a queen and a few bees walking around inside there. So they called it colony collapse disorder. The causes of colony collapse disorder are still debated out there. You have tons of studies that have financial backing from basically Bayer, Monsanto, and other pesticide companies that point the finger at varroa mites and the disease loads that they carry as being the cause of colony collapse disorder. The studies that are done from countries that have banned neonicotinoid pesticides, or the studies that have been done by universities that got grants with no associations or ties to the pesticide companies, say no, it's the pesticide companies, the neonicotinoids. Neonics work on shutting down an insect's nervous system. That is how they work. It's a derivative off of nicotine that is used to create neonics, and it shuts off an insect's nervous system, where in humans it actually stimulates our nervous system, and that's why you become addicted to cigarettes. Well, the nicotine in pesticides basically just turns off the insect's brain. Well, you get to a tipping point, and it makes sense that something that's affecting the bee's nervous system damages it enough that it can't fly back to home. Now, that's not conclusive enough. They're just saying that. But here's a few more things for food for thought. Countries that have banned neonicotinoid pesticides don't see colony collapse disorder anymore. The continent of Australia, that has never had a varroa mite step onto its shores, does not suffer from varroa mites, still suffers from colony collapse disorder. Well, if all these studies say varroa mites are the cause of colony collapse disorder, how in a country that doesn't have varroa mites do you have colony collapse disorder? And finally, bumblebees. They also suffer from colony collapse disorder, but varroa mites don't live in bumblebee colonies. So again, how do you have another bee-type insect that lives as a superorganism that collects nectar and pollen to feed its children suffer colony collapse disorder when the carrier that all these studies are saying is the cause of it doesn't exist in their colonies? So there's all these things out there that say it's the fault of pesticides that causes colony collapse disorder, but you've got a lot of big money that pushes against that, just like it took years and years and years and tons of people dying of cancer before they could even put a Surgeon General warning on nicotine. It's not healthy for you, but that's a person's choice to take cigarettes and chewing tobacco and stuff like that. It's the same thing with agricultural products here, but you have a heck of a lot less push in the beekeeping industry to change the pesticides that are put on corn, soybean, and oranges, and fruit trees, and berries, and vegetables and stuff like that. Their industry is so much bigger than ours, and it's just our little voices out there shouting, saying, hey, your chemicals are really bad to our livestock. So that's right now the situation of things. All right. Delayed robbing there. You will actually see that where your hive can die of colony collapse disorder, and the other hives in your apiary don't want to touch the honey that's in your hive. Most of the time, if your hive dies and it's getting overwhelmed by hive beetles, or it got knocked over in a tornado or whatever, most things that kill off your colony, other colonies come in there and just rob the heck out of the honey and put it back in their own hives. Typically, if your hive dies from colony collapse disorder, other hives just kind of pick at it and they don't really want much to do with it, and it's probably because it has such a high saturation of the pesticides in the colony.
Next slide.
Yep. All right. This isn't really about diseases or anything, but this here, it's a great little resource for beekeepers to go ahead and list your hives out on this sensitive crop registry. Your bees are a crop, and the laws in Iowa state that other farmers can't do something to their crops that would destroy your crops. So if you all of a sudden have a vineyard with 10,000 grapevines there, the farmer next door to you can't apply a herbicide with the wind blowing across your farm that would kill all your grapevines and destroy your farming business. They have to wait until it's safe for that herbicide to be applied to their field. So the wind has to be blowing the other way, or no wind, or whatever the case may be. Well, you listing your beehives, it's going to put restrictions against commercial applicators, not your farmer that doesn't have a license that's spraying his own field, but the guys with the planes that are flying in their dive bombing fields. If there is a blooming crop there that the bees would be foraging on at all, just basically if the plants are in bloom, they're not supposed to put a pesticide down on those plants from the hours of like 8 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. It's supposed to be outside of those hours so they're not just crop dusting the heck out of your bees. And those bees aren't coming back half dead and then putting all those chemicals in your hive as well. If it's the Joe Blow farmer that is just got his own tractor out there and is spraying his own field, it doesn't restrict him. But commercial applicators, it does protect you against them.
Good idea.
Within 1 mile radius.
Good idea if you're going to have neighbors of one sort or another near your bees. Get to know your neighbors and let them know what you're doing. And most of the time, especially since you're raising honeybees, they're favored, right? You can usually work something out with your neighbor, whether he's a farmer or a residential neighbor, let them know what you have. And they're usually willing to work with you on it. I'm surrounded on all four sides by agriculture where I am. But I know my farmers, and they know I have bees, and I give them honey, and they know I have hives, and they're careful with how they apply things around me. It can be worked out.
Another thing that's helpful, I'm just up the road here on Somerset, and as you're going to Somerset Road, there's a airport, a privately owned airport over there. It's really a crop dusting company right there on the left-hand side of the road as you're going up here. I've kind of been making friends with them. I don't know if that's the correct word. They're always a little leery when I come in there and stuff. But I try to, on a yearly basis, drop off a gift basket of honey and stuff. And I just keep reminding them, hey, if you're doing a tank mix, if you're doing anything that label-wise you know you shouldn't for the bees, or if you're putting down a fungicide, just let me know if it's going to drift onto my bees. I'll just move them out there the night before. That's all you need to do is tell me you're going to be spraying a tank mix or a fungicide, and I'll get my bees out of there. Now you may be like, why the fungicide? Well, there's a fungus that lives in the hive. I think we talked about this at an earlier stage, but a fungus that lives in the hive, and it lives in the pollen cells there that the bees are turning into bee bread.
Yes.
The fungus breaks down the outer shell of the pollen kernels and allows the bee to digest the pollen a lot more and get a lot more nutrition out of it. If that fungus is killed off by a fungicide, the bees can try eating a whole bunch of this pollen or feeding it to their young larval stage, but they get basically zero nutrition off of it. It'd be like you eating 20 pounds of rice cakes and not really getting any nutrition off of it. Or you know how humans, if they eat a whole bunch of corn on the cob, you don't really digest it very well. The bees can't digest that pollen, and they literally starve to death. In the larval stage, they starve to death. The adults don't, but the larval stage, it's like 90% of their diet is pollen, trying to let them grow up from this little bean into a full-size bee and stuff there. So if this fungus can't reincorporate itself for 3-4 weeks, you're losing 3-4 weeks worth of brood production in your colony. I'd rather just move my hives out of there than have them get sprayed down with a fungicide. So.
Cool. We got one more slide. Ta-da.
Extra information for you guys out there. Andy Joseph, he's really good for giving a call to anytime when you got questions. He is the state paid apiarist, so if you just want him to come out and see if you're doing things right, if you want an inspection, if you just are unsure about something that you're doing, give him a call. That's his job, to travel all over Iowa. Otherwise, he just sits there and stares at a computer screen in his office waiting for somebody to call him. So give him a call. He'll come out to your apiary.
Everybody, there's no fee, right? He just
No.
comes out and inspects you, and you get from him, you get advice and information.
Yeah, it's a service provided by the state of Iowa. Reading the Buzz, you can get a lot of cool articles in there, or at least find out what's going on. You hear about upcoming seminars and field days, not even ones put on by the Iowa honey producers, but you'll find out about speaking engagements in other states, other bee clubs putting on things of that nature. Obviously, reading books is a great place. Internet searches, I'd actually kind of hold off on internet searches. If somebody has 2,000 videos out there, yeah, they probably know their stuff. But there's a lot of crackpots out there. I even know one person that is going into 5 years now that they've been doing videos, and their stuff is totally against most of the books that you're reading out there. They keep like 40 hives inside their house and stuff, and it's some real weird stuff. If this goes against what you hear from 100 other beekeepers, just watch that stuff. YouTube, it can be great for some stuff, but oh my gosh, there's so many people that just are experimental on there and are trying to do stuff for people to be interested in them. So
Also, keep in mind, beekeeping is very, very local. What works here, it necessarily is not going to work in the southern United States or on the West Coast. What works there and the struggles that they have, we're probably not going to have the exact same struggles here. It's very local. Be in touch with what your colony is doing, and work off of what you see, not what you hear from someone who's hundreds and hundreds of miles away.
yeah, I mean, Florida has 11 nectar flows in only 1 month of inactivity. You don't want to start taking advice on how to winter your hives, or how many boxes you should have on it, or times a year for treating and stuff like that from somebody that's giving you advice for Florida's beekeeping practices. It's completely different than Iowa's.
These hive beetles we talked about tonight are really a minor nuisance here, but they're awful in the south because the south doesn't get the same cold winter that we get, and that reproductive cycle that the hive beetle has down there isn't interrupted. So that's worse than varroa for them. They're constantly struggling with hive beetles.
Yeah, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, they have hive beetles 365 days a year. So their populations just in the wild can skyrocket, and when they smell all that good pollen in your hive, in those states, they can take over hives and just crush them, even if you had healthy hives otherwise, because you might have some super good smelly stuff in your hive that they've brought in, and suddenly that day 1,000 hive beetles show up and they're all trying to crawl in there and stuff, and it just overwhelms the bees. So in those states, it's a real problem. Here in Iowa, you do not get that sort of exposure. You will get some. If you lift your lid up and you see 10 or 20, that's still nothing to just freak out about. Down there, when they lift their lid, they will see 100, 150 when there's a problem. That is the tipping stages that things are just nasty down there. So that advice on hive beetles is horrific for them.
I guess on the last point, so this is our last beginner beekeeping class, but in 2 weeks we start our FBI club meetings, same place, same time, 4th Thursday of the month is when we'll have those, and there'll be a lot more people here that have experience of 2, 3, 4, 5 or more years than really just myself and Jason. So it's a good time to meet people that are close to you, nearby. Beekeepers love to talk, so you'll have plenty of people that you can ask questions of and hear what they have to say also. It's usually a pretty good time. It'll be topical. We'll typically have a general topic of some sort every meeting, but it's always, there's nothing we can't talk about that relates to beekeeping. So
It usually coincides with the season.
typically,
that
yeah,
topic.
yeah. So I think first class, I'm not sure, but we're probably going to talk about, hey, how'd your bees winter? It's usually what the first thing beekeepers want to talk about when they get together, and what plans are people making to, are they going to go for a large honey crop this year, or are they going to try to grow their operations or find that balance in there somewhere? So it's a good time. A lot more learning to happen can happen during bee club, and you're always learning if you're a beekeeper. There's always something you're picking up. So come and join that too if you would.
Anybody have any questions from any of the 7 classes?
Home run.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks guys for coming. Jason's got some stuff to give away.